Hey everyone, I just want to remind you that this is part 2 to a 2-part series where we're talking about project life cycles and platform management. If you haven't listened to part 1, you can find it on all of our social media and on our blog. If you have already, enjoy this one, and thanks for listening.
Life cycle.
Once physical tools now need to be virtual.
Right, but there's no management requirement, as far as if you're managing a sticky note on a board, what are you doing? You just write it down, you're done. You stick it up there, and then you take it, you move it. It's really simple. It's a lot different than if you're hosting your own, Slack channel, then you need to now manage that software. You don't just create it and then it just sits there and takes care of itself for the rest of its lifetime. Mm-hmm. You actually have to manage that now. So that's why you're now having DevOps managers. These are people whose sole responsibility it is to actually maintain the software that's being installed software as a service or platform as a service that's being used, so you're maintaining it, or you're installing it, or you're upgrading it, or you're just using it for the basic project lifecycle. A lot of it's just maintenance. Mm-hmm. You do have to go through the process of using it. So if you're using a task runner, you've got to run let's say you're using Gulp, you have to run Gulp, to compile and minify your assets. But you're also having to maintain Gulp. You've got to run upgrades on it. You've got to maintain the composer files that you're using. You've got to maintain all of the middleware libraries. Gulp in itself is just requires a ton of different middleware that's all being generated through npm libraries. So now you've got somebody whose sole job it is to make sure that all of those dependencies that allow Gulp to run are also installed and updated and secure. And so you're creating an entire industry of professionals who get paid a lot of money to just take care of DevOps tools. Mm-hmm. So to one degree, it improves performance, and it allows for these sort of remote working conditions, among other things. But they didn't exist beforehand, and so as they are definitely being introduced. To your question, I shouldn't say they are being introduced. They were introduced, and some of them still are being introduced. But so to your question about whether I'm talking about that there are too many tools that are being introduced versus there are too many tools that exist and there's nothing that can be done about it. Yeah, it's that they're being introduced. It's that people aren't going to find something overwhelming necessarily if it's always been the status quo. Certainly certain things are overwhelming and certain things are exhausting and stressful in general in life. But engineers aren't voicing their concerns at an 80% rate in this particular sample size about the number of tools that are being used simply because it's always been that way. They're doing it because they're like, hey, listen, stop putting more stuff on top of me. It didn't always used to be this way. This is not what they're used to, but it's growing and it's growing and it's growing and it's growing, and they keep adding things on. New things are getting developed. And so one of the things that needs to be done is that we need to just find a way of sort of being able to improve management of those and sort of shore that down a bit. So to your question about 4, I think the actual question we were asking, right, was do 4 or more systems need to be updated, right?
That was another one as well.
Right.
So one of the ones I brought up was do 4 or more systems need updating during the process? And in this question, the process was changes of permissions. So this is a new or leaving team member, right, and stuff like that. So
right. So those two things go hand in hand. So to your question, are 4, is it too much for four things to be, for 4 products or services to be involved in a life cycle? No, I don't think it is too much for it to be involved for the regular user. But from what we found in the data, it wasn't just 4. People were looking at 8 or 10 of the items that we were listing. If it's you've got a hosting platform and a version control software and a communications device and a project management system. Those are your minimum items out there. You're going to have a minification process out there. You're going to have some sort of like middleware management tool. It's going to be way more than 4. But if we're talking about how 4 or more items or services or 8 or more services affects us, it's not just about how it affects the people involved in the project lifecycle. It's about the people who have to manage them, because someone's got to run the upgrades on all these things, And to me, if you gave me 4 tools and you said use these for your project lifecycle, I'd say fine. But if you said use these 4 tools for your project lifecycle and run upgrades on all of them throughout the project lifecycle, I'd be like, well, now you're just adding work. But it's not. I mean, 4 is a small number. We're really looking at like 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. I mean, it's just growing and growing and growing and growing. Mm-hmm. So that's my perspective.
So, in your opinion, that's the actual problem. Is that the current, or?
Well, I'd say it's one of the 2 problems. Yeah. I'm simply saying that 4 is a small number. It's a small number for somebody to have to deal with in a project lifecycle, but it's exacerbated by the fact that you have to maintain it. When you get to 5, 6, 7, 8, you're creating a problem for the people who have to use it, and the people who have a problem, and you're creating an expense to manage it. So I would say that they're both issues. I'm simply saying that to your particular question about whether or not 4 is a large number. I don't think it's a large number.
It's the maintenance of 4.
Yeah. When we get to 5, 6, 7, 8, I think you've got 2 problems. It's kind of like it's not a problem for you to necessarily, like, a lot of people like to have multiple dogs. It's not a problem necessarily to have 2 dogs, 3 dogs in your house. But if one of them is has a medical condition and one of them is
you can't take both of them. Both of them outside. At the same time,
They can't be in the same room and stuff like that. Yeah, now you're having to maintain them, and you're not. It's not just a matter of just like regular use, like getting through your house and making sure the right doors are closed, and how do you operate using
breakfast and dinner.
Right. And I guess dogs are probably not a good example, because unless you're the type of person who has a utilitarian use for dogs, like a hunter or like a police officer or something like that, where they're accomplishing some kind of job that's aimed at assisting you. So like, let's use that as an example, I suppose. Like, what if all bomb sniffing dogs also had to go to the bathroom every 5 minutes of their life?
It becomes a full-time job.
Right, exactly. And like, you could probably say like, dude, I clean up after my dog all the time, and like I do. I have 2 dogs, and I have to clean up after them all the time. And yeah, that's totally manageable. But when it becomes beyond manageable and it becomes a full-time job, is like, if you start saying to yourself, okay, I've got I'm a police officer, and I've got or I'm a SWAT, or I'm TSA, or I'm a bomb diffusing agency of some shape or form, military or whatever, and I've got a whole squad of canine squad with like, let's say 5 bomb sniffing dogs. When I've individually, they're fine. At 4 or 5 dogs, I can probably maintain it. But they need to be cleaned up after on a regular interval. Once they start overlapping one another, it's like there's shit on the floor every 10 minutes, because you can't control like when they need to be. Yeah. And that's part of the issue with a lot of these DevOps tools.
Is that you don't have control when these updates and stuff are going on.
We have control when they're going on. We just don't have control over when they need to be done.
Yeah.
Because oftentimes the developers who are creating them are deploying these security patches for a reason. Mm-hmm. And you have no idea that it's going to be coming. It could be coming down the pipeline on a consistent basis. Or, the more that you add into the life cycle, the more frequently these things have to be done over, in total. And now you're creating a full-time job for somebody. But you're also now, like, getting to the point where if you are the guy who's just the trainer or the handler for the dogs, or let's say you're not even a trainer or handler for the dogs, let's say you're just an agent and your partner happens to be a dog, and you're
responsible for grooming, boarding, feeding.
Well, forget about that. I mean, someone is assume you've got somebody who's full-time responsible for that,
Okay.
right? And now we're on to 8-9 dogs, and now he's got to maintain that. He's got a full-time job just maintaining, grooming, and cleaning up after them. Now you've got an agent who's actually he's a partner with the dog. He's part of the canine unit. He's a human, and he's your developer or your engineer who's involved in the project lifecycle. Okay, and your dog is your DevOps tool, right? And then you say to him, okay, well, now you've got 9 dogs to assist you in your job. You're like, well, hell, man, now I've got 9 leashes, and I got to try to control the I don't have to worry about the cleanup. I don't have to worry about the grooming because there's a full-time guy who's available for that. But I do have to deal with all their personalities. I have to deal with their, training all of them and determining which direction they're trying to take me. It's like watching a guy walk down the street when he's given, the dog walkers out there. He's got like 12 leashes and he's holding it like this. He's like dragging him through the streets. The people who are involved in are essentially being, humans are resources and DevOps tools are resources, and DevOps tools are there to assist those humans in their job. If you have too many of them, or you have too many tools in general, it becomes a management process just from a workflow standpoint. You've got a manager, now we've talked about you've got a manager who actually has to run upgrades on all of those tools, but you have to have somebody who actually has to work with all these things now. So now you've got a full-time job person just running the upgrades, just handling the services themselves, or just grooming the dogs and just cleaning up after the dogs and feeding and whatever the dogs. And then you've got a full-time job just trying to keep up with the 8 or 9 services that you've got there. It's like, oh, I have to check my tickets today. I have to update my tickets today. I have to check Jira today. I've got to update my Jira issues today. I've got to make sure that I split this feature off onto a new branch, and then I've got to merge that branch back into the master branch, and then I've got to update everybody in the Slack channel and make sure that I tag this particular commit ID, and then make sure, and then all these tasks that you're doing just for management purposes that have nothing to do with the end
development.
End goal of development, right? And that's your dog walker scenario where this, I guess not a dog walker scenario, but the police officer scenario where this police officer had original task. His original task was to worry about trying to find bombs, and now he's worried about how to manage 9 dogs.
You give him so many tools that he can't do anything with the tools.
Right.
So yeah, I see that now. I see that, and I think we definitely I think we got that from our focus group. Do you?
Oh yeah, absolutely. I don't think there are many developers out there who don't feel that way. I would. Well, let me put it this way. I think there's a generational difference between developers who are more used to writing sort of custom code, and then the developers who just sort of like jumped right into, oh, well, let me implement a lot of plugins and existing. It's like WordPress developers are really used to just like download the plugin, enable it, paste in the short code or whatever. I think there are a lot of people out there who are just used to being middleware, what I call middleware junkies, or like addicted to middleware. And like those people probably are going to disagree with me. Like, oh no, it's great, it makes my job a lot easier. But I think a lot of people who are like, dude, like I don't need to download this middleware because I could write a script on this that does the exact same thing and it would take me an hour. I think there are a lot of people like that,
who would rather make something their own than have to download something to make sure it's up to date constantly.
Yeah, exactly. But they're not going to do that because it's like it makes it more difficult for getting other people involved in a project, because now you have to train them on how to use your software,
on how to use what you've created,
right? And then eventually you're going to have to run upgrades, and if there's a tool out there, why reinvent the wheel, right? But I do think there are people out there who think to themselves like, kind of would rather reinvent the wheel if it's simple enough and it doesn't have to. If in the long run it's more cost effective, but those people are also having to work on teams with other developers, other managers who are, not going to be those types who are going to think, especially
or have a different, I don't want to say motive, but kind of maybe an admin might think, if this person goes and develops this custom code for us and it does this great job and it's awesome, but now I have to make sure everybody knows how this works. Whereas if there was a plugin for it, everybody could, maybe not everybody, but some people would have some familiarity with it.
Also, sometimes it's just a sales thing. Like oftentimes people are like, oh man, I've heard this cool word Docker, mentioned a lot lately. Like, I'd really like to implement this. And there are use cases for each one. Docker's got a good use case, but so many times I hear people like want to use Docker for something that it would provide no benefit to at all. And it's just about like, this is the tool that I've heard is great. I've spoken to a lot of consultants and they agree, and these are the benefits it adds. It's almost like if you've got like an air conditioner in your house or whatever, is let's say you like wanted the Nest thermostat or something like that, and you were like, and someone was like, oh, I don't know anything about the Nest thermostat, first of all, just so we're clear about that. But if, like, let's say the Nest thermostat was really good for modern air conditioners, and you were like, oh man, well, I'm getting a new air conditioner and I really want to use it. I heard that this is really good for that. And then someone's like, oh yeah, it is good for new air conditioners. And you're like, well, I'm getting a new air conditioner. And really what they mean to say is something like, well, it's really good for, air conditioners using more modern day technologies. And you're like installing a Freon based air conditioner. And so you've got all the right buzzwords, but you don't know anything about the underlying technology. And so in the case of like Docker or something like that, you get a lot of like people who are like, oh, but it creates these containers that you can use. And you're like, well, what the heck are you going to use a container for? You maintain one website and one server.
Just because it does it doesn't mean that you need to do it.
Right. It's like putting on 2 pairs of underwear. You're like, you've got it. It's kind of what it is. It's like you've got a server. A lot of people, it's like they've got one website on one server. They need one virtual host, and that's it. But for some reason, they're like, oh, well, I hear that I can manage a container on that operating system, and that would allow. It has all sorts of great benefits from what I hear. And like from a marketing standpoint, they could be like, security benefits and maintenance benefits, reduce the cost of like actually having to maintain multiple different operating systems and different virtual machines. You can have instead you can just have an underlying kernel and you can have different containers, and you're like, but you don't need a different container. You only have one website. You're not going to use it. What the heck do you need to use it for? Oh, in theory, well, maybe from a scaling standpoint, like, do you want it? Maybe you'll need to have multiple different applications in this.
Why not worry about that when you get there?
Yeah. Also, like, maybe you're not going to do that for scaling. Maybe you're actually going to have multiple different servers, so you can have some sort of like load balanced, situation. Like the model of your company is basically going to say, like, do you have a bunch of small applications, or do you have one really large one? And you should know that fairly up front.
Yeah.
So I do hear that a lot where it's a sales particular issue. And so to that end, and bringing back to the point, the communication between teammates oftentimes drives that, because it's like in a single project lifecycle, the resources that are involved, you've got designers, you've got information architects sometimes, you've got marketing resources, you've got a project manager has a boss, and you've got a product owner, which is typically the client, and then you've got a developer, systems administrator, quality assurance resource. The majority of the resources involved in that project don't have to deal with those DevOps tools.
The people that make the decisions probably don't have to use it, right?
Right.
Or manage it or whatever.
I mean, the people who are making those decisions, for the most part, are not as significantly impacted by the burden of them, just the positive end results of having them. until it comes down to cost.
Yeah.
When you actually talk about like how much time and money you're spending in having people maintain these systems. So that's when it gets to it's run up the flagpole to the point that the
decision
makers like, this isn't cost effective for us. But that's all part of the evolution of innovation. I mean, the introduction of DevOps is about that, and at some point there will be a point when there needs to be a way to better manage those and reduce them a bit. And
the diminishing returns.
Right, it's the law of diminishing returns. Eventually
you'll have too many dogs that you can no longer do your job with because of the fact that you have too many of them.
Right, but it's not that police officer who's going to get to make that decision.
Exactly.
It's the police commissioner.
Yeah.
And it's not going to reach the police commissioner.
Commissioner's not touching a dog.
Right. It's not going to it's not going to reach his desk. It's not going to get his ear until 3, 4, 5 years down the line. For the first couple of years, the cop's biting his tongue, and then he's bitching to his superior, and his superior is trying to bide time, going, now's not the right time for me to ask the commissioner for a favor, and then the commissioner's up for re-election, so he's more focused on that, and then eventually he gets to the commissioner's desk, and the commissioner's not right now, I can't deal with this, and then it gets to the point where the commissioner's like, our budget's out of control, what's going on? And they're like, well, I've been asking you to do this for the last 3 years, and he's like, oh, okay, well, let's take a look, let's look into this, let's get some data about this. So, I mean, that's just how innovation works. I mean, they're saying right now, this is too much for us to deal with, but it's not being reduced by the higher ups, because the higher ups, they've got other things that they're concerned about, and until it actually affects their bottom line, which won't show up immediately,
it's definitely delayed.
Yeah, it's definitely delayed. I mean, look, most publicly traded companies aren't analyzing their costs on a micro basis like this. They're looking at they're not going to find that out until the quarterly reports come out.
Yeah, they're more trend based.
So like if you're experiencing an efficiency, performance and cost effectiveness problem in January, the actual financials don't get converted until the end of that quarter. So you've got to wait 3 more months. So January passes, February passes, March passes,
doing the same
beginning
thing,
of April,
doing the same thing.
And now you've got to wait a couple. Usually it's like another month and a half before it actually gets reported to the investors in the quarterly earnings report. So now it's like 4.5 months have passed since the actual impact. And now investors can hear it, and investors can react to it. And when they react to it, then the board reacts to it, and then it sort of trickles down.
It
whatever.
Trickles down from there.
But bottom line is, it's just a delay, and it'll come to a head eventually.
Wow.
I mean, that's my take.
Yeah, but I think we have the data in our focus group to prove it, or support it. Maybe not prove it, but support it definitely. Like, people that are using the tools are feeling the pinch of my productivity is being hurt by the fact that I'm being forced to use so many tools. Whether or not that they think they're useful or not, these tools are being implemented. I'd be hard pressed to say always without their consent, but more than not because of something that helps the team as a whole or the company as a whole, not necessarily them specifically do their job.
Yeah. I mean, and if you look at just sort of the evolution of innovation and technology outside of the field in general.
Oh, I don't know here, Mike. We're going down a path that we may never come back from.
But there's always been a sort of an ebb and flow between like developing products that are specifically targeted at a certain task and then developing and sort of an all-in-one tool. I mean, it's been that way since I can remember.
The clearest example I can think of is cable.
Yeah, okay.
Because cable used to be, channel by channel. Then they bundled it. And then people were like, well, now the bundles are getting too expensive. So Netflix, Amazon, Disney now, everyone's going
Amazon's there's an all-in-one solution You know,
Yeah, I'm specifically talking about the video platform.
Sure.
So you're gonna all of a sudden you're gonna have subscriptions for. I mean, heck, I have subscriptions for 3 different entertainment things. Well, eventually it'll come back around. Someone will go, hey, Amazon, and it's already starting to. Amazon, it'll say Amazon, Netflix, and Disney are all going to be $50 a month, and you can see it now. Hulu and Spotify are together as a bundle. You get one with the other. It's the cheapest Hulu, but it's still I think you're right in the sense that it will start to come back the other
like
way.
you had this. There was a point in time where it was like, you may remember, there was a point in time when you specifically bought you could buy back in like the fax machine days, right? You had like the all-in-one faxing, printing, scanning machine. It does everything. Yeah. And nowadays most printers, they'll do scanning and printing, but they're probably not doing faxing, or they have the opportunity to do that, or the option to do it, but they're but you're not necessarily using it. But you had these like all-in-one tools. You had the Swiss Army knife of this, right?
Yeah.
And then it sort of took this weird change where people were like, oh well, this is these are the different types of printers. Where this one's really good for like printing like high resolution photos, and this one's intended primarily for like printing out
black and white copies,
paper, letter heads, and this one's really good for like printing on vinyl, and you had like this sort of like more focused specialization
period.
of right, and then it sort of came back, and that happens kind of with everything, where it's like, kitchen appliances are like that, all sorts of house appliances are like that, where they go through this like specialization, and laundry detergent is a great example. I guess I know I'm sort of jumping all over the place, but laundry detergent is a great example of that, because you have these sort of like all-in-one detergents. And then you start watching these commercials, and you're like, wait a second. And they're like, oh, but this one's really good for preserving your colors. And this one's really good for, like, and you're like, whoa, you hold on. But, like,
I just want clean clothes.
I just want clean clothes. Right. And you're like, okay, well, so I'll tell you the all-in-one. But then they're like, but why would you use the all-in-one when you can use this one? It's really good for blacks. Yeah. And this one's really good for colors. And this one's really good. And televisions are like that too. You start seeing televisions where it's like, okay, you've got the LCD, and they've got like the QLED and the OLED TVs, and certain ones are really good for blacks, and certain ones, and they're different technologies altogether, completely different technologies. But they serve different specialized purposes. Yeah. I mean, that's a super specialized purpose. Is like, oh, I want a really dark black on my TV.
On my TV.
Yeah, and so like it always goes back and forth because it's the sale. I mean, that's the whole value add. If you had an all-in-one solution already, there would be no and that's what all people wanted. There'd be no competition. So you're like, okay, so there's an all-in-one solution. I'm gonna move that in reverse. I'm gonna create a really specialized, focused item, and now I'm gonna advertise it as, this is the specialized, focused item that does this one task best and better than anything else, and that's really what it comes down to. I think that the trend in DevOps is going to be more. You've got all these hyper-focused, hyper-specialized tools. It's going to start transforming more into like, what can we do that kind of does all of these, but maybe not all of them. Maybe it does. It helps you with all of them, or something like that.
We kind of brought it up in this earlier, in the sense that that's what AWS and Azure are doing now. They're starting to implement other parts of the DevOps or the project lifecycle.
Right.
That you can host, but now you can do this, and now you can do this, or maybe not come up with their own tools, but maybe the early beta version of this was integrations, right? Is maybe easily integrating easily integrating one tool into another, so that you can have less work in managing.
Yeah, like I think there are a variety of things that AWS and Azure are not even bothering to attempt to do, but I do think that they're a good example is like Elasticsearch. So Solar Search was a really popular search service for a long time, SOLR, and Elasticsearch is like, it's kind of a weird way of saying like of AWS saying like, hey, we've got this really great hosting service out there, and Lambda allows for all these like really cool ways of just basically creating sort of like logical workflows that which is like, I won't dive into that, but it's a service that exists like outside of the realm of hosting, and so does Elasticsearch. It's really about like, at that point you're kind of talking about data management. Data. It's almost it's really just a database and a different syntax for database queries that exists outside of the hosting realm. So yeah, they are kind of like sort of creeping out just slightly outside of the realm of just strictly hosting. To the point. Anyway.
That's interesting. Well, I think it's been a good talk. It's been an hour.
Yeah.
So this will probably end up being 2 podcasts for those that are listening live. Just because, one, we kind of changed the mic position a little bit so we could talk back and forth, and the topic kind of switched up on us, but it's been fun. It has been fun, and we definitely covered a lot, so hopefully you guys found it informational, and we'll get these podcasts out as soon as we can. It was nice talking to you, Mike.
Yeah, man. All right. Talk to you.
Talk to you.
Thank you, guys.
Bye.